Violence and bloodshed are gripping parts of Afghanistan, threatening to upend peace talks and derail future negotiations aimed at ending America's longest war. A recent wave of attacks have erupted across the southern Helmand province over the past few weeks. Dozens of people have died, and many more have been injured in the region, which is considered a longtime Taliban stronghold. The U.S. and Afghan government fired back with airstrikes as clashes continue. Army General Austin Scott Miller defended the military's ongoing operations while calling for an easing of tensions on both sides.
I would say not only the violence, but the rhetoric on all sides needs to go down. The rhetoric should not be threatening and all inciting more violence. What everybody should be doing is finding ways to bring this down. But we will defend the Afghan security forces, and it's, we've shown a great deal of restraint because we're trying to make this peace process work. And at the same time, we'll defend our forces. That's important for everybody to know. The protection of the coalition is it's not negotiable, and so we'll defend our forces as well.
Now, this all comes as fragile peace talks continue between the Taliban and the Afghan government following February's historic agreement with the United States. However, there's still growing fears the peace process will collapse and lead to even more violence. BBC News chief international correspondent Lyse Doucet spoke to one Afghan boy whose classmates were killed in a recent attack.
That day is still in my mind. It goes round and round my thoughts. When the explosion happened, there was a massive cloud of smoke. Even people far from here heard the explosion. It was very big and loud. We thought when the peace talks started, the war would end. But look, even the talks are happening and the war continues right here.
So Lyse Doucet is joining us now from Kabul, Afghanistan. Lyse, why has there been a major surge in violence across Afghanistan in the past few weeks? Is this an indication that, the peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government, that they're falling apart?
I think it's too early to say that the talks are falling apart. They're only in their second month. They got off to a good start. I saw it myself when I was in the Gulf state of Qatar. They all said that the talks were better than expected, the way the Afghans from both the Taliban and the government side came to the negotiating table. But then weeks on, the two sides are stalled over procedural issues, including sensitive issues of Islamic law. And at the same time, as you mentioned, there's been this upsurge in violence, including a recent Taliban offensive in the strategic southern province of Helmand. Now, the United States, General Miller, believes that's a violation of the deal reached between the United States and the Taliban in February. The Taliban say they're simply taking back territory that had been seized from them. They clearly want to use this violence as a bargaining chip at the negotiating table. But what we're hearing from General Miller and many others is, if it keeps going, it will threaten the peace talks.
And Lyse, this latest round of violence in Helmand province has forced thousands of families to flee. Many are displaced. Take us through the latest developments and explain how the clashes are impacting Afghans.
It's a sad truism of this war, which has now dragged on for 4 decades for Afghans, that every scene of a battle is also the scene of a major humanitarian crisis. And we saw it again in painful detail when the attacks began in Helmand. These pictures of families putting whatever goods they can carry on the tops of trucks and vehicles, tens of thousands of people fleeing the violence again. And of course, Helmand is a province that has suffered some of the worst of the violence, and they had dared to hope it was over. Doctors in the hospitals kept updating us that the main hospitals were absolutely full. There was a patient in every bed. The schools were shut, means thousands of children weren't going to school. There's a bit of a stalemate now in Helmand, but people are braced for asking themselves, when will it happen again? When will there ever be peace?
Lyse, in February, the U.S. and the Taliban reached a historic peace agreement. And I remember at the time, there was a lot of talk about how the U.S. could hammer out this peace agreement that did not include the Afghan government. So what is the role of the U.S. now, especially as we're seeing an uptick in violence?
the role of the United States is absolutely crucial. First, as you heard from General Miller, they still believe that their commitment to their ally, the Afghan security forces, stands, whatever deal they reach with the Taliban, and that if the Taliban attack, as they do in Helmand, the U.S. will come in with the airstrikes. They were blistering airstrikes. The Taliban condemned them as a violation of the deal, and General Miller said, no, if you attack, we are going to defend our allies. But General Miller and the U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad play another role too. They've been shuttling between capitals, from Kabul to Doha to Islamabad to Central Asian states to European capitals, going around and around to all of the players who could have an impact on this process of searching for peace, to urge them to push their allies, whether it's the Afghan government or the Taliban, to move towards some kind of a negotiated way out of this war. Because if there isn't a peace deal, well, there's a lot of very painful scenarios that could await Afghanistan, and Afghans know that better than anyone else.
Lyse, as you know, there are growing fears that any type of peace deal with the Taliban will mean a rollback of women's rights. You spoke to one prominent woman who's the chairperson of Afghanistan's Human Rights Commission about the peace talks and the constant threats she's facing. I want to play some of that interview.
Every time I'm in a car, I think about having kind thoughts because I worry that they might be my last thoughts. I mean, it's that serious because people I know have been killed, people I know have been threatened. My colleagues have been threatened, my colleagues have been killed, so it has moved closer and closer every day. One of my biggest worries is the talks failing. I worry about the consequences of that because there would be no good scenario if the talks fail. Either the war will rage on, which will mean more civilian casualties and more misery for the Afghan people, or there will be an attempt at military takeover by one or both sides, which will again fail and cause, I think, civil war.
So, Lyse, take us through her reaction to the volatile situation. I guess that my question with regards to the Taliban is, even though they are in negotiations, nothing has really changed in the way that they perceive the world, the way they perceive the role of women. I note that one of the women that I follow on social media, Zarifah Ghaffari, she's 26 years old. She's the only female mayor right now in Afghanistan, and she talks about how difficult life is. My first thought was, well, okay, so there's a female mayor. That's a huge first step, but it doesn't sound like it is if the Taliban still continues to hold these antiquated notions.
You know, I think I should ask your viewers to put yourself in the place of Shahrazad Akbar, who you just heard from, and also Zarifah Ghaffari, whom you mentioned. You know, people who are watching this broadcast might after it go and get in their car and drive to work. The biggest thing which will be on their mind, perhaps, is getting stuck in traffic. There's not an exaggeration when Shahrazad says, I try to think kind thoughts, because I'm not sure when I get in my car that I won't be the victim of a targeted assassination. Zarifah has already escaped 2 attempts on her life. There's a wave of targeted assassinations across Afghanistan, and even more chilling is no one takes responsibility for it. It's moderate clerics, it's academics, it's poets, it's politicians, it's people like Zarifah and Shahrazad, and most people believe that it is the Taliban, and it does raise the question, have the Taliban really changed from their harsh rule of the 1990s? They say they do. I've asked them repeatedly when I've met them outside of Afghanistan, and they say that they will allow girls and women to be educated, that they will allow them to work. They even use this expression, I don't know where they got it, that women can choose their life partner. Afghan women say, okay, fine, you accept that Afghanistan has changed, but have you changed as much as we have changed? Because there are certainly members of the Taliban who are as dogmatic as they were in the 1990s. But it has to be said, ask any Afghan women, and the deeply patriarchal society, there are some people here, including people in power, whose views on women are not that different from the Taliban.
So, Lyse, forgive me if you have already mentioned it, but moving forward, you know, what is the state of talks? Are they still meeting? And I'm sort of curious about what the common, obviously peace is the end game, but are they far apart on sort of their common goals?
think we have to bear in mind that this is not the first peace process where you have, warring sides talking, but also fighting at the same time. We saw that in the Colombia peace process. We've seen that in places in the Middle East. The difference with this one is that Afghans expected, and it was expected under this deal between the Taliban and the United States, that there would be, if not a ceasefire, at least a reduction in violence. But I think the most important thing which has to be said now is that the talks are at a very early stage, and they are still talking. No one has left the resort in Doha where they are talking, and they're still hoping that they will be able to get over some of these obstacles. I think we have to be realistic. This is not going to be a matter of months. This could be a matter of years. And I think the concern is, if they drag on too long, will they be overtaken by events on the battlefield? So it's really important just to keep talking and to keep emphasizing the importance of talking towards an end of this war rather than fighting towards an end, because Afghan civilians will be the biggest losers of all.
Indeed, very important reminder. We're spending a lot of time on domestic issues here. It's a good reminder that there are some really, really important issues that need to be talked about happening around the world. Lyse Doucet, thank you so much.